Um, Rick Hotton Sensei has been teaching and training karate and a little bit of Aikido for, gosh, 50 years now, a long time. He started as a kid, in case anyone's wondering. He started as a super traditional martial artist here in the small town of Sarasota, Florida, and has continued to work and train and study with as many different instructors as he could find, and is now a world famous instructor himself, traveling all over the world when there's no COVID, to help share his perspective and his understanding. And we are super pleased to have him here today. Rick Sensei?
Hi. Thank you. Yes, I want to say that I'm deeply honored for being asked to participate in the Solstice seminar. It was an amazing class. Jacqueline just did. I mean, how cool is that? I never really thought about those sort of things. But anyway, just a little bit of background. Like Melissa said, I began my karate practice, I guess this October would have been 50 years ago. And it was kind of like, I inherited my teacher's dojo in 1976 and was pretty much an introvert. So I taught karate sort of in my town. I had a pretty good sized dojo at the time. And then around, I guess, 2014, one of my students said, Sensei, you're getting a little bit old, and before you die, maybe we should put some of your stuff on YouTube. And I was flabbergasted. I said, no talking to the camera. He said, no, what we'll do is we'll shoot it kind of voyeuristically, just like people are participating in a class. And I said, well, maybe. But anyway, he did, and a very sort of introverted person the channel took off, and I ended up teaching karate all over. So one of the things that when I go off and I encounter amazing people, I always was horrified, sort of with the idea with the YouTube channel, is that I never wanted to be the person telling people how to do their martial art. And in fact, I kind of loathed that kind of approach. So what I would say is that I'm just basically trying to share some of my experiences and things that I found to be epiphanies along my path. And if they are meaningful to you, then by all means take them. If they're not, then absolutely just continue to smile and move on your way. But that's the spirit in which I want to offer my class. And when I teach abroad, I often teach with gentlemen and women and other karateka that have gone through instructors training programs in Japan. I didn't do anything like that. I had a very self-guided practice, and I sort of espoused to that. Whether you're training in a dojo with a famous sensei or a great sensei or whatever, I think a big part of our training is done sort of on our own when we're just feeling the wind on our skin and the moon's up above. And for me, there's no greater experience in that direct connection to your martial art, sort of listening to your body, constantly kind of dialing in your internal dialogue. It's sort of how you're seeking along your path. So I espouse to that. And so that's sort of what I have to offer. In that regard, when I think about my martial art, I think a lot about, what am I actually after? Like going from sort of the periphery, like the technical elements. And I would say that for me, it's almost like the analogy of like a tree. So it's like the leaves of the tree are all the individual movements, say in the karate or the aiki, the technical ikkyo, nikkyo, sankyo, whatever. And then those technique are attached to principle. They're sort of more kind of at the substrate of it all. So of course, technique doesn't always have to be exactly precise. If the operating principle is occurring, then things are usually pretty good. And then if you kind of keep tracking that back, I've always been on the thought for what the heck is at the center of the tree? Like what is the core of the tree? And I think that is your own personal relationship with your martial art, which I think you should find. I mean, you shouldn't adopt anybody else's, but kind of come to terms with that on your own. For me, it's direct connection to the moment. It's like ichigo ichi, because it's like that's the only thing you have is this moment right now. And I think this is very much the founder of Aiki's sort of idea that it's that connection. This is your life experience, and this is, as the moment proceeds, how you interface with that and the quality of that engagement is what it's all about. So for me, that is the core of the tree. So to kind of get there and kind of understand some of these elements, let's back up slightly to the principle-based area. Now, in my practice, I live very much in the right hemisphere of my brain, so I don't really think Aiki and karate anymore. For me, it's very much just like a type of martial wisdom or a body intelligence. And there's certain like base actions that just make that experience better. At least that's what I have found. And it gives us more of this quality of engagement. So one thing that I think of often is that really your brain and your central nervous system, that's essentially you. I mean, your organs and your bones and your sinew really are there to sort of accommodate that and keep it like an antenna moving through the world. So this structure here is like essentially what you're all about. Okay, so if you were a musician and you were studying the Alexander method, or if you're reading Jordan Peterson's book about the first rules of life, or if you just get up in the morning, the first thing you do is you get up. So this idea of sort of having an axial elongation, I think, is central to sort of having a feeling of connection to the world. So when we stand, this idea of almost like, I would say, like a coat rack. So you have this certain type of verticality that you're composed of, and then everything sort of hangs naturally upon that. So in karate, if we're standing in, say, a ready stance, that's sort of the state you want to be in. You want to have this sort of composure about you. Or if you're in Aiki and you're stepping in your Hane position, that feeling of shoulders down, eye up, kind of looking to an infinite point, creates a different quality of engagement that I think is all things are sort of then attaching to that element. The thing is that we tend to think about that when we're doing a kata or we're doing a weapons training or whatever, but then in our everyday life, it sort of becomes diluted. And in the course of our day, we start to harbor tension and we kind of get into this kind of hunkered down state. So I personally like to become habitual with it is every now and then during the course of my day, take stock of myself and sort of try to create the shape again. In my practice, which I would say is almost like a microcosm for life, everything I do, I try to have that element to it, whether I'm rising up, say, from Seiza. So a lot of people, when you watch that, when you're coming up, say, from your Seiza like position like that, you want to kind of make sure that that axis always is really straight and you're sort of always moving from your center. In our standing bow, I mean, now these are all elements that I think people tend to dismiss, but if you go back to the core of the tree, one thing has no greater value than the next. What really matters is really what you're doing right now. Like how fully engaged are you with the right now? So having a mindful ritsure or standing bow, if you're standing and doing that, with that sort of composure is just as significant as if you're doing a shio-nage or in karate, a side kick. It doesn't really, the dynamism has nothing to do with it, but the engagement has everything to do with it. So I would say very first thing is kind of have a really good sense of this axial elongation. And if you just have that shoulder down feeling, eye up and looking to an infinite point, that sense, I think your antenna going to be working just a little bit more effectively in the world. So I would say that'd be the very first thing. Secondly, I would say is you want to have a good sense of connection to your center, your hara. So in karate, we say everything is hara supported. So when we move, and I thought maybe what I could do is teach a little bit of karate. So maybe you guys could learn something that you might even be able to bring into your Aikido. But if you want to try this with me, take your both hands and put them out in front like so. Okay. And we're going to take our right hand and we're going to pull it back to our hip, palm up like that. So essentially our edge of our fist is going to rest on the crest of our pelvis. So if you take your arm, the small protrusion in your bone here, and you align it, that's basically the trigger point of your hand. And just take your arm and just gently glide it out like it's like a pendulum swinging. Keep it palm up. When the elbow starts to leave the hip, just rotate it and put it next to the other hand. Yeah, let's try that again. Take the same hand, pull it back. Yep. Push it out gently, keep it rubbing the whole way. Right, and when the elbow starts to leave the hip, rotate it palm down. Yep, now take same with your other hand, pull it back, and press it out, palm up, and then palm down. Yep, and back again, same. And let it rub, keep your shoulder nice and low, slide it out like it's going down an imaginary tube, and then palm down. Now go back to your original hand and pull it back. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to alternate the hands. So this is like a little bit like tapping your head and rubbing your stomach in the martial arts sense. So as I push this hand off my hip, I'm going to start pulling the existing hand back. So when they get to the halfway point, have the hand going out, palm up, the hand coming back, palm in. and then just continue through, right? So same again, draw it back. Yep, and then out. Yeah, now try to do that without hesitation. So we start the hands together and finish the hands together. That's awesome. And again. And once again. Good. And again. So basically this is a ski or punch. Okay, but the point that I'm trying to get to is not necessarily the mechanics of the punch, but having the feeling generate from your center. So relax your arm for a moment. Now, what I'd like you to do is just keeping along that axial elongation, that center line, I want you to just pull your right hip back a bit. And I want you to imagine you had a little cup of water sitting on your hip, and you're going to splash that to someone in front of you. So I'm going to kind of pull with my middle, my muscles across my midriff, and I'm going to snap my hip to the front. Yeah. Yes, and try to do that without disrupting this line. So pull it back again, almost like you're pulling a slingshot, and then snap. Yeah. So the object is how far can you toss your water? Okay, pull it back again, and then snap. Yeah. Now put your hand here. Now here's the point. What we're trying to get the technique essentially to go from the periphery into the center. Okay. So instead of feeling like you're generating your punch from the action of your shoulder, I want you to think more like you're launching your punch through this. Keep this really soft and feel like you're launching your punch through this sort of a slingshot feeling. So as I snap my hip, I let my arm go out. Yeah. Now if you're going to do the other side, the same thing. You're going to pull your slingshot back a bit, and I'm going to kind of snap, and my punch is going to ride off the momentum of my hip. Like that. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, and just try that a couple times. Get that really relaxed, floppy feeling in your center. So I'm going to pull, snap, that feeling. Pull, snap. Yeah. Yeah, just go ahead and do a few of those. And as you're doing them, I want you to take stock of where you're holding the tension in your body, because you don't want any tension up in your upper arms. It wants to all be sort of emanating from your core, from your center. Yeah, that's right. Now, what will happen with your arms being really relaxed is you may get a little bit of a tendency of your elbows to fly out. I want you to keep punching down that imaginary tube. So that feeling like that. Like that feeling like that. And it doesn't have to be really powerful. Just feel like it's launching from your center. So you get the kimochi, the energy feeling down more in your core. Okay, so that would be sort of mechanically getting in that neck of the woods. The next thing I'd like you to do is just make your fist. And I want you to imagine as if your fist had peanut butter in it. And how would you squeeze the peanut butter so that it would go out between your first two knuckles? Like there is a particular inflection in your hand that you would make in order to do that. So it's like a going that wayness, that feeling. And you're going to do that and harbor no tension at the end. You're going to squeeze the peanut butter sort of like an impulse and then relax. So it's like relax, which would be quite different if you wanted it to go that direction. If you think about it, there's a much different inflection in your fist. So that squeezing feeling. Okay, now at the same time, your arm is doing, your hand is doing that. I want you to close your throat just a bit, press down on your diaphragm, and find a connection between this squeezing and this little bit of compression. That feeling. So I'm kind of putting my breath under a little bit of back pressure, and I'm aligning this compression with this connection to my center. Right. So ultimately, what I'm not hitting with is my hand. This is like the messenger. The message is the movement from my center, the connection of my center. Yeah. Now, when I began my Aikido practice 20 years ago, I found that that was exactly what's happening in a touching dynamic. So when someone grabs a hold of your arm or whatever, you never wanted the technique to occur. I'm sure you're aware of that from your shoulder. You wanted to feel this low sort of resonance with your center. Like it's really your center that's supporting the technique. So there's this type of intimate connection to this resonating line inside your body that I would argue is the form. It's not the external shape of the thing that you're looking at, but it's sort of that resonant line inside the shape, almost like a harmonic, like almost like music. That is to me what I'm on the hunt for. That's the feeling of the technique. So when we punch now, I want you to feel that at the very end of the punch, you're going to exhale and get that connection, that feeling. Yeah. Yeah. So squeeze, press down, and connect to your center. Yeah. So, and if you're anything like me, you know, you're going to be standing in your kitchen, you know, for a couple thousand repetitions until you really kind of dial in that feeling. But always moving mechanically via your center and up, that feeling like that. And it doesn't have to be fast. It can be done slow as well, but you want to have that feeling of connection to your core. So that'd be the second thing. So first thing is this going upness, this axial elongation of your antenna. The second element would be Hatha supported technique, or technique coming out of your center. And again, those are two components that the stress of our daily life tend to take us out of. Like when we're bombarded by stuff, we tend to kind of get hunkered down and our energy gets in, and we feel this tension in our shoulders. So every now and then you want to shake that loose and kind of get that feeling of having this. So I think there's definitely a difference between practicing a martial art and being a martial artist. The difference is that the martial artists, these things are becoming habitual. It's like part of your everyday everything, and maybe not just dojo time. So I think that idea of like trying to extrapolate the lesson out into your everyday life, just kind of take stock. Don't be too judgmental, but just check yourself out every now and then, see if you still got that going on. So axial elongation, Hatha supported technique. Third thing I would say is the thing we all tend to ignore, and that is basically our breath. So my sensei years ago was very adamant about communicating that the breath is like the mother of all technique. I mean, it is the substrate that, I mean, it's basically your connection to life. It also has this unique feature that it's part of your autonomic nervous system. So when you're sleeping or whatever, you're breathing, but yet you can control your breath. It's like a place where the mind and the body sort of have this overlap. So when performing, even when I'm performing Aikido technique, like Satomi Sensei often says, I think his vernacular is absorb, desorb. So if you're receiving a technique, if you're doing, say, Kokyu Tanden Ho, and someone grabs your wrist, there's this feeling of absorbing that energy and then projecting your energy. And it's a type of respiration, which should be linked to your actual respiration. Like you want to inhale and sort of float your uke, and then exhale and press through. In karate technique, you never halt your breath, because when you do that, you come to understand at some point that your breath is just a way of channeling your energy. So if I want to extend my energy into a technique, I exhale and press my energy through my breath, whatever. That's the feeling, is like that resonating line that's coming through my body is accomplished very much so by the quality of my respiration and my breath. And that would move pretty much, I would say, an element of musubi, of connection. So in times of dynamism, it has much more of a staccato feeling. In times of just sort of collectiveness or just feeling of connection, it has that same sort of resonance or harmonic. But we don't think of our breath a lot. So I think just being mindful of that is important. So yep, axial elongation, Hatha supported technique, and then an understanding of your breath as being sort of the substrate or mother of all techniques. So sometimes when people ask, can you help with my technique? I'll oftentimes start with their breath first, because it's almost like your operating platform. Once the breath is correct, then the technique starts to align, almost like notes attaching to music. That's sort of the idea. Okay, the fourth thing I would say is going back a little bit to what we were talking about, this kind of linkage of the internal parts of your body. So I call that like a kinetic chain. So let's go back to your punch once again. So maybe just put your punch out. And what I'd like you to do is, I want you to imagine that you are up against the wall. And I want you to see if you can feel, if I was pushing against the wall, could I feel that in the soles of my feet? Like, could there be a connection between this, a resonating line through my body into the sole of my feet? So instead of just, like the old paradigm years ago was you wanted to, speed was a function of relaxation, say in the karate world. And then when you hit, you wanted to tighten, and that was the idea of physics. It's like you're converting speed to mass at the moment of impact. But I don't really think that's happening at all. What I think you're doing is you're kind of projecting your energy in that direction. And I probably didn't feel that as much until after I adopted an Aikido practice. So when you strike, it's almost like it's almost like I'm shoring up every part of my body except this part, and I'm kind of creating an internal wave that goes in that direction. I don't know if you can kind of see that, but there's almost like a resonance through my body that goes that way. So I'm mentally going that way. That's the feeling, as opposed to just driving my arm out in this maybe kind of robotic fashion like that. And I think that has a lot of crossover. When I think of striking in karate, when I think of making a punch in karate where I'm making that kind of connection, for me in Aikido, that is absolutely no different than when I have, say, a katate dori, and I'm making like this ikkyo motion where I'm driving that line through my body, that kinetic chain through my body into my uke's body. And maybe very specifically on a particular line around their shoulder or whatever I want to do in order to accomplish my connection to the uke. So that resonating line through your body requires a certain type of maybe intimacy of feeling, really feeling your body. And I like that word. I think I tend to live in the very right hemisphere of my brain. So the word feeling has a lot of meaning for me because it takes all things into consideration. It's not, what is just the trajectory of my arm, or am I doing it fast or slow? I don't really like to break things into those discrete units, but the word feeling for me is sort of what I'm after. Like, what is the resonance? What is the energetic of that action? So I think tuning into your body and becoming very quiet and aware of that, maybe in that individual practice, or whether you're, outside with your bokken or your jo, or you're just practicing an imaginary Aiki technique, to feel that internal resonating line so you can use your imagination to sort of ramp up your experience. I think that's really important. So axial elongation, Hata supported technique, we have your breath, we have sort of this kinetic chain, which again, I would argue is the form of the movement, whatever Aiki or karate. And then the last thing I would say is this feeling of going outness. In karate, we often call that zanshin. Satomi Sensei speaks a lot about, we talk a lot about irimi as not simply physically going in, but mentally going in. And he uses, if you read his book, Aikido and the Harmony of Nature, he talks about Morobayashi, where you have two people on a ravine with a log in between, and both are moving forward. And the one with this stronger sense of going in, not an aggressiveness about it at all, just a sense of presence. The other person is forced to sort of yield to that. So this kind of feeling of connectedness and going forward, I think is a huge part of trying to find the trunk of the tree. That for me is like how the moment is always approaching, and how I'm meeting it, like any relationship, like how I'm engaging that is the quality of how that presentation occurs. So, I think these principles, these branches of the tree slowly lead back to the thing you're really after. And I would equate that with self-defense, because I think, your life is just a sequence of moments, and the more fully you engage that sort of experience, it is defense of yourself. So that you get to the end of your life, you say, oh yeah, I lived my life fully because I was totally connected to that. But of course, we all know that there are elements in the day and stressors that sort of detract us from that, and energy goes up, and we're no longer moving from our center, our breathing patterns become totally different. And if the Solstice seminar is about like human performance, I would say those are the elements that I have found that have made my karate better. But for me, it's not about the karate, it's about extrapolating that into your everyday everything. So, and then finally, the other thing I see often when I go out is that folks maybe have really strong technical skills, but they're just not, there's this level of mindfulness that I think really has to be, it has to become a habitual. I mean, you have to somehow sync up to that. Funakoshi Sensei, the founder of the style of karate that I practice, Shotokan, said that he could tell the skill of somebody by their ritsure, their standing bow. And then I remember reading a book from by Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if he's a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, and he said he could tell the level of a person by how they turned the door and entered a room. And I think what you're witnessing really is the same phenomenon. It's a feeling of connectedness to the moment. And there's sometimes, my sense is that there's a quality of deliberation, of almost like slowing down to be up to speed, because we naturally tend to move maybe just a little bit faster. But you know, life is sort of occurring like this, the life experience. And of course, the trick is to sort of sync up to that. And oftentimes we're so frantically trying to accomplish, or our want to is so great that we're a little bit out of sync in that. And so I think this sort of finding the moment is almost what I would equate with what relaxation is. So when people say, what is relaxation? I would say it's not really devoid of tension. That's kind of like a very rudimentary explanation. I think it's living completely engaged in the moment. So there's no schema, no sort of anticipation of the future. There's no regret or sort of thing in the past that all sort of manifests in our being. It's just sort of like a living in the nowness, like shoulder down, eye up, antenna making this connection, whether you're dynamically moving in your martial art or whether you're just, you know, doing the dishes. I mean, that's the trick. So, yeah, so every time I move, do anything in my karate, and I use that as sort of the metaphor for life, is I try to do it with a degree of deliberation. When I bow, here's another thing you might want to think of, even when you make all of the bow in our art really have a different sort of sentiment attached. Like a bow to a dojo, for me, conjures up a certain different feeling than a bow that I might have with my training partner, or a bow that I might have with my relationship with my teacher. Like they all have some sort of embodiment, some sort of sentiment that's attached to the gesture, or else the gesture is just the nothing gesture. I mean, you want to give it pause to kind of feel that emotion when you're doing the bow. So for example, if you're just making your standing bow with your training partner, how many times you'll see people that are just kind of like, and then they just go about their practice. Whereas other people, you know, they move differently. And for me, I think that's what your training is. Your training is to kind of help you learn to move differently, like through your whole life experience, like differently, with that sense of engagement. So I'm not sure if those things will help your Aiki, but they certainly are some epiphanies along my path that, you know, I would train and I would find a certain element, say, oh, wow, it feels way different than if I did it the other way. And then how do I extrapolate that? How do I take those concepts and continue to draw larger circles of metaphor? I think this is a big part of how our consciousness guides our practice. Like you learn something in the dojo, say, hey, how can I extrapolate that into a much larger vista? Like, how do I do that? And I get to the point where everything begins to cross-inform everything else. And it's like the two hemispheres of your brain. You start to move a little bit more into that right hemisphere where everything is everything, and you're learning something from a stormy seashore. It's not these discrete elements, you know, of this or that, because that's sort of your right or your left hemisphere trying to sort of make sense of this poetry that's actually what the living experience is. And my conduit into that has been my martial art. And of course, the wonderful people that I've met, people like Satomi Sensei, and people that have kind of provoked that journey. And I just hope that they can offer some provocation. You know, I don't think in any seminar I'm going to say, do this or do that, and it's going to make a quantum difference in your training. But I think if you change your perspective a little bit, if you look at something if you look at the forest from a slightly skewed angle, the panorama is completely different. And I think that's sort of what the seeker's journey is like, how do you do that? How do you change your perspective? I mean, maybe it was Christ's experience for all I know. I don't know. It's a genius experience. It's like you look at something slightly different and you see something totally new. And I think maybe incumbent on our practice is to continuously like do that, to continuously look at our martial art from a different perspective and let that grow, just like the strength of our technique grows, is the strength of our inquiry growing. So I don't know, that's sort of my offering to you guys. I don't know if that helps at all. I was trying to find something that would be common ground for all of us. But we have another 10 or 15 minutes if you have any questions about that, or if you'd like to do the punch again. There's a lot of other technique we could possibly explore, but I think it's probably more in the realm of just adopting a different perspective. The problem, let me just quickly say, the problem I have found, at least, is people tend to rely on the institution just a little bit too much. I think that's what the independent journey for me has been so liberating, is people tend to, they wait kind of passively for the institution to deliver. But I think the thing you really always had control of was how you presented yourself to the experience, like your level of inquiry. Like I can look at karate as self-defense, and that can be a whole venue of practice. Or I look at my karate as a sort of mind-body connection. So when I'm doing my kata, I can feel, wow, I'm grabbing the floor with my little toe, and I feel like micro connection to my center, and my breath is resonating, and wow, it feels like I'm hitting the sweet spot of the tennis racket. That's a totally different paradigm of practice. Or I can say, well, maybe my karate is just energy. So that's now my will and my intention drive my techniques. I don't even worry about the form or the construct. Like Bruce Lee said, he said, most people practice a martial art with too much concern. So if I want to block in that direction, if I feel my mental focus like a magnifying glass is going that direction, then my block naturally just falls on the line of that movement. So the pliability, my body just responds to this intention of my mind. So I'm not thinking of this or that or the mechanics of technique. I'm just letting my intention find the connection. So that's like a totally different paradigm of practice. And I can push that aside and say, well, maybe everything is just life, like with living life with fullness and stepping into the momentness and feeling of connectedness. And that opens up another totally different sort of set of questions. So I think the thing you really have control over is this internal dialogue and how you're sort of always provoking yourself to have a more expanded experience. And after 50 years, I would like to hope that 10 years from now, I have a completely different take. And just like the phoenix rising up, like every day I want to reinvent my martial art with that level of energy and enthusiasm. So enough of that. So you guys,
Sensei, there's a bunch of really engaging questions here in the chat. We'll see how many we can get through. The first one, and I think you've touched on this a little bit already, is one of the students would like to know, how do you separate your Aikido and your karate personalities, or do you integrate them into one? And this is both philosophically and in your daily training.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I originally I studied Aikido because when Satomi Sensei first came to the United States, all my karate friends, he came to Sarasota, all the karate friends went and trained with Satomi Sensei. And I continue with my karate teacher. Then I met Melissa Bell Sensei in 2000, and she was practicing Aikido. She came and studied karate with me. She said, you should go visit some of your karate friends that are all training at these seminars. So that's my indoctrination into the Aikido world. My original intention was to hang out with my friends and enjoy that. Then I said, wow, this is a totally different way of expressing the body. How can I bring this into my karate? Then at some point I thought, it's really not about the karate or it's about the Aikido. It's really just about sort of expanding the amplitude of a type of body intelligence, where one is this kind of very relaxed feeling of connectiveness, and the other one is this very intention-driven focus. But really, it's just like music. It's like some great symphony has moments, there's a crescendo and other parts where you have the sense of grace that's going through it. So I no longer think that way. I try purposely to blur all the sort of this or that demarcation coming out of my left brain inquiry and just feel the beauty of it all. And Satomi Sensei says this thing. He's always saying, no more form, no more form. So I think, it's that to me is the Zen aspect of the martial art. And I think when you sort of can position your mind in that space, I mean, I will watch a snail crawling across my deck and say, well, that's moving in forward stance. So, I mean, that's how I would like my living experience to be so intertwined that everything is augmenting everything else. So I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sensei. There's a couple questions about breath here. How do you control your breath? Do you control it differently when you're moving quickly or slowly?
Sure.
You concentrate more on the inhale or the exhale, or is it something else entirely?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I saw somebody was going to be doing a class on sort of how young people. I mean, I think really when you look at young people, children, babies. I mean, you're basically seeing something that just came from the source. So if you want a sense of naturalness, I think you almost have to see that. Like when you watch a child play, for example, that's how I would like to engage. That's sort of full engagement is how I would like to operate in doing things. I think, it's like when you were a kid and a bird flew in the room, it was this cornucopia of action and light and color. And then mom said, honey, it's just a bird. And then that experiential magic was kind of distilled down to a bird. And so I tend to think life should be more like that. It should be more verb-like than noun-like. So I look back at young people and how they breathe. So belly breathing, like drawing your breath in deep from the lower abdomen, just like if you watch a child just sit, it sits with this elongation that we were talking about. And even when you move, even if you break that axis, you still have that sense of everything hanging low, like a jacket on a or a coat rack. So you want to breathe in low from the lower abdomen. And I would imagine that if you were to break it down, so you want to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, although I sometimes worry too much that people think too much about that, but you want to fully engage your breath. And your breath or your ki, like the word aiki, if you turn it around, it's ki, it's the yell in karate. And it's basically your energy converging with the moment. So your breath has a certain synchronicity to what you're doing. And we just know that naturally, but because we live in our heads a lot, those things become somewhat dissonant. In a karate technique, if I'm trying to drive energy, I'm going to use my breath almost as a way to drive that energy through my body. If I'm doing two techniques, say in succession, I'm going to divide maybe my breath into thirds and have 1/3 at one part of the technique. So if I'm making like a block and a punch, but then I'm always holding I keep 1/3 on the first part, 1/3 on the second part, and I never totally exhaust my breath. In a martial sense, that place when you're at the very bottom of your breath and you're inhaling is a type of tsuki. It's a type of opportunity. My sensei described it as like if you were on watching a train go by, how could you throw a rock across to the other side? Well, you'd have to wait for that space in between. And that's the bottom of the breath, is that space in between. So you really don't want to completely expire. I mean, even the word expire is a word that is associated with death. I mean, when you completely expire, so you always want to live in that space that's a little bit there. And then again, mechanically, that you can use your breath to find that connection to your core. So I press down on my diaphragm. That feeling of connection to my center is facilitated a lot by my breath. If I didn't do that, I would end up harboring my tension and my karate would get kind of robotic. And I'm thinking whether you're doing Aiki or karate, you don't want robotic martial art. You want a free-flowing martial art that's in accord with the occurrence. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Sensei. We're going to try to fit one more in. In this time of isolation, many people are training on their own. It has many solo kata practices.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, it's not just about technique. There are many principles that are involved. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, in the 2 minutes we have remaining, a little bit about how solo kata practice in karate might be applicable to Aikidoka practice. And also if that one of the principles that comes in might be some of the principles that come into that training, like zanshin and posture.
Yeah, well, I think, honestly, I really liked the last class Jacqueline taught, because she said that, that even in a disadvantaged situation, there's always a way that the human spirit can kind of negotiate and find some sense of goodness. And I think you have to kind of be open to that and be kind of on the hunt for that. So whatever befalls you in life, I went through a horrible arthritic situation in my 30s. And I just, for 2 or 3 years, I couldn't train. I mean, this whole identity that I placed on myself and my physicality, I started reading books, Zen books. And, my whole identity had been based kind of on that sort of athleticism. Then of course, being a martial artist, I figured out through diet and cleansing myself, and like all the rheumatologists were like, you can't be doing this. It's like, so you were supposed to be in a wheelchair. and I got myself out of it. But when I came back to my martial art, I found that I had this whole other element that now was a part of my experience and what was sort of molding me as a human. So I still had the physicality. I could still do it like I did before, but my identity wasn't based in that. So I think as we negotiate circumstance, we try to assimilate those things in a way where they're productive to our being. I'm a huge um, a, a proponent of the idea of finding your own martial art. I think there's a certain, folks say, well, I'd love to do your karate. I'm like, no, you want to do your karate like you. Like the trick is to align your art. It's like with your own inquiry. And it's just like, if you do that with a certain pristineness, there's an element of authenticity that you will feel and that the world will understand. It's almost like folk art. You might, like I didn't train, in Japan with the great teachers. I trained in my backyard with the wind on my skin and the moon above me. And through that experience, I somehow, like almost like folk art, I found some truth in that. And I would say when we're alone, to kind of quiet your mind so you can find that space that is the celebration of your existence. I mean, when you think about it, your life is a blessing. And if you really wake up to that, I know that sounds almost like a cliche, but if you really wake up to that, then you find the enrichment of that. Like, how do I truly let my inquiry create this work of art that is my life? And that's what I would like for anybody in their journey is, like I said, don't necessarily wait for the institution to deliver. Great teacher, I think, is just a provocation. They don't try to give you their journey. They allow you to stand next to them and sort of see it for yourself. So I would say getting quiet, like dialing in your inquiry, like really trying to press your experience into larger and larger spheres, and then just kind of letting that sentiment attach to your life experience. So